Sometimes you do have to feel bad for the Cleveland Browns organization. No matter how much what happens to them is of their own doing and, how much it's a situation of their chickens are coming home to roost. The fact of the matter is you look at the Cleveland Browns. This is a team in 2014 that people didn't really have high expectations for, and understandably so. But then they start off the season and are finding ways to win games. They're beating quality opponents. They're playing people tough. And all of a sudden you're getting into December, and the Browns at 7-4 are right in the mix, not only in the playoff race in the AFC, but in the AFC North race. They had a shot to win the division. They were in position to win the division. It was a phenomenal head coaching job by Mike Pettin and a great coaching job by the rest of that staff. When you're looking at the Browns, you're thinking 7-4. A winning record is in sight. Cleveland Browns football is back, baby. This incarnation of the franchise since '99. I don't think it's ever been there to begin with, so how the hell could it be back? But that said, though, you're talking about 7-4. And that's 7-4. You haven't even really played the young quarterback yet. You were without Josh Gordon for all of that stretch. And you're sitting there and you're saying, wow, this could be something. This Browns team could really be building towards something for the next season and following seasons to come. But then if the Browns find the way to Browns it, they lose their last 5 games. Manziel goes in. He looks terrible. Hoyer's bad. It all falls apart. And now you're talking about a 7-9 Cleveland Browns team based off of the way they finished. Instead of talking about the positives and focusing on their trajectory in a good way for 2015, we're talking about, are they even a 7-win team? Because the way they ended the season was not good. And the offseason didn't start out very well for them either. Josh Gordon's flunking drug tests. Johnny Manziel's going into rehab. Oh, Christ. Just not good. Not good. So now, after a season where you had your top weapon gone the majority of the year in Josh Gordon, and then your number 2 option in Jordan Cameron was gone for different parts of the season due to injury, and now is left via free agency to go join the Miami Dolphins, you sit there and you look and say, just how bad could this offense be in 2015? Well, the Browns did try to address their offense some in free agency, but honestly, they kind of went the scrap heap route. Bringing in a Josh McCown who flopped badly in Tampa Bay in 2014. Maybe McCown will be a little bit better for them in 2015, maybe not. But then you look at the receivers they brought in. They brought in Dwayne Bowe and Brian Hartline. Dwayne Bowe was so bad that the Chiefs, who didn't have a single receiver score a receiving touchdown in all of 2014, said they didn't want him anymore. And the Miami Dolphins didn't want Brian Hartline anymore. And these are the guys that the Cleveland Browns go out and get. Instead of drafting young, explosive, big physical wide receivers, they go for other guys' retreads and scrap heap players in Dwayne Bowe and Brian Hartline. Yeah. But to be fair to the Cleveland Browns organization, as I talk about so often, championship teams are ultimately built through the draft. And I do think that if there was a lot of other organizations in different situations, we'd be talking about the Browns having one of the really, really good drafts in the 2015 NFL draft. I love the selection of Danny Shelton. I get the selection of Cameron Irving. It's really an example of providing long-term flexibility, but short-term perhaps adding strength to strength. Then you're looking at them getting a Nate Orchard out of Utah in round 2. Love that pick for them. A really good value pick there and a guy that could potentially be an impact edge rusher for them. Then you look at round 3, getting Duke Johnson, adding strength to strength again. You've already got Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell. Now you're bringing a guy in Duke Johnson who I think is better than either one of those two. And then Xavier Cooper at the end of round 3, beefing up that defensive line even more. It was a good, solid draft. And when you look at it, this draft could be a situation where some of the key foundation pieces are in place for a contending Browns team in the future, but not necessarily right now. Now, what are the biggest strengths and potential concerns or areas of weakness for the Browns heading into this 2015 season? Well, let's start off with the offensive line. That, to me, is by far the biggest strength of this Cleveland Browns organization. Now, you look at it, you've got 3 former first-round picks of the organization, 2 other second-round picks on the offensive line. Joe Thomas, 3rd overall pick back in 2007. Alex Mack, former first-round pick from several years back. You've got Mitchell Schwartz, who was a second-round pick back in 2012. Joel Bitonio, who I think personally was better than Zach Martin as a rookie inside at guard. He is a second-round pick from 2014. And then you throw a Cameron Irving into the mix, a first-round pick this year. Those are 5 offensive linemen that were all taken with either first or second-round picks. I mean, this is the type of stuff that the Dallas Cowboys did to ultimately change the direction of their franchise and go from being mediocre to being viewed as a contender, with the drafting in recent years in the first round of Tyron Smith and Travis Frederick, and then last year in Zach Martin. You know, the Browns in some ways have patterned their offensive line after what the Dallas Cowboys have done. And what's wrong with that? When you have the lack of weapons outside that you do, and you have a defense that can be susceptible and be suspect quite a bit of the time, what better way to be able to protect your defense and protect your quarterback and potentially open up things outside than to have that great offensive line that can buy you time, that can open up holes for their running game. I expect the Browns' running game to be a real strength of theirs in 2015 as well. This is a team, you've got Terrence West, last year's third-round pick out of Towson. You've got Isaiah Kroll. You've got, I think at times he might have been the best back out of the 3 they had last year when you threw Ben Tate into the mix. Now you throw in Duke Johnson, a guy who reminds me quite a bit of a Shady McCoy. You got him out of the U in the 3rd round. This is a Browns team that even if one of their running backs gets hurt, they have a couple of other guys that can do a lot of things. This is going to be a team that I would expect to be able to run the ball and run the ball well and run it at an elite level in the NFL in 2015. I also like their secondary too. You've got Joe Hayden. He's a stud. They brought in a veteran in Traymon Williams. While he's, not the spring chicken anymore, he's still a solid NFL starting caliber number 2 corner. Then you look at the fact they've got a Tayshaun Gibson, hopefully returning back successfully from his injury, because he played really, really well during the 2014 season. Then you've got a bunch of other young guys in the mix in that secondary, most notably first-round pick from last year, Justin Gilbert. If some of these young players, some of these young draft picks from recent years can develop and be able to contribute, that Browns secondary is really, really going to be a strength for that team, and it's really going to make it hard for opposing offenses to be able to throw the ball and stretch the field vertically on that Browns secondary. With that said, though, there are some big concerns. I mean, the receiving corps, for crying out loud. Andrew Hawkins is nice in his role, but that's just in his role, as being that slot guy, a guy who can move around in different places. They're legitimately going to potentially start Dwayne Bowe and Brian Hartline at wide receiver. You're not getting anywhere doing that. You're not winning anything doing that. And then on top of that, you throw in the fact that they let Jordan Cameron go in free agency, didn't replace him in free agency, didn't address that position early in the draft. You look at it and you see that the Browns' passing game could potentially be every bit as bad, if not worse, compared to what it was in 2014. I look also, too, for a Browns team that runs a 3-4. Their linebackers are really shaky. Kruger's a nice player. Barkevius Mingo is solid against the run. Problem is, you drafted him 6 overall in 2013. When you spend a top 6 pick on an edge rusher, you expect him to be able to rush the passer. You don't want him to be a run stuffer. And you just look at it and you say, and then you're talking about this as a team with a guy like Carlos Dansby inside. He's not the youngest guy as well. I have quite a bit of concern about this linebacking core. Now, maybe a Nate Orchard could come in there and provide a boost, provide a lift at that edge rush position. That will most certainly help. But, with guys like Carlos Dansby being up there, Barkevius Mingo never really showing much as an edge rusher, Now, linebacker core is a big question. But then ultimately, quarterback. That's the biggest question of all. Is McCown really going to be a quality starter for you all year? Or at some point in time, if you have to go to Manziel, is Manziel going to show you anything at all? Are you going to get any type of viable NFL starting quarterback play out of the quarterback position if you're the Cleveland Browns? It doesn't even matter if that receiving core plays above itself, and the linebacking core is great. If their QBs are doo-doo, this team is going to be doo-doo, period. Now, in terms of players to watch, obviously Johnny Manziel is going to be the player to watch, not just from a media standpoint, but from a franchise and organizational standpoint as well. You invested a first-round pick in Johnny Manziel. At some point in time, you got to find out if he's the guy or not. If he's not the guy, then you wasted a first-round pick in 2014 to get him when you could have had Teddy Bridgewater or Derek Carr even. And now all the while you're going to have to go yet again and draft another young quarterback in the first round yet again, and you start the clock all over again. But if Manziel can show you something, he shows that he can be a good leader on the field, if he shows that he can adapt to the NFL game and the style of the NFL game, keeps his nose clean off the field, then the whole trajectory and environment around the Cleveland Browns potentially changes dramatically. Other players to watch, I've got to go with their last 2 first-round picks in Barkevious Mingo in 2013 and Justin Gilbert in 2014. How much different would the Browns look right now if they had taken Odell Beckham Jr. as opposed to Justin Gilbert? I mean, Gilbert was a complete and total washout in 2014. All reports indicated that he wasn't acting like a professional. He wasn't putting in the work. He wasn't working hard. He wasn't dedicated to it. It's just hard to understand. You spent your entire life trying to get to this point. You get a little bit of money, and then all of a sudden you don't want to do it anymore. Or you're not putting in the work necessary to make sure you can make even more money going forward or have the professional pride to validate your draft position. It just makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. The Browns spent a top 10 pick on Justin Gilbert. They need him to develop into that top 10 talent that he was supposed to be, because if you've got him on one side playing at that level and Joe Hayden on the other side, that's a really, really good Browns secondary all of a sudden, and that's a team that starts to establish a defensive identity, and everything else works backwards from there on that side of the ball. And then Barkevious Mingo as well, their first-round pick in 2013 out of LSU. You drafted him 6th overall to basically be a run stuffer. And he's solid in coverage too, but he's just not a good pass rusher. And some people will sit there and say, well, he hasn't been asked to do it a lot. Maybe that's because he's just not good at it. Ultimately, the Browns need Barkevious Mingo to be a better, more impactful edge rusher, period. Because if he could be a more impactful edge rusher, it could help out Paul Kruger on the other side. It could help out a guy like Nate Orchard when he spells one of them. It just could positively impact the defense in so many different ways. They need these first-round picks, and how about that? I'm talking about the players to watch. The first-round pick from 2013 and the 2 first-round picks from 2014. They need these guys to pan out, not flame out. In terms of the Browns' schedule, I look at 2 stretches here. I'll start off with the first 3 weeks. The Browns have a tough schedule this year. They really do. They've got to play the AFC West. They've got to play the NFC West. It's not a good schedule for them. So one thing they could do to build some momentum is get off to a hot start. And in the first 3 weeks of the season, there's a chance they could do that. They start off on the road facing the Jets in week 1, but then they've got 2 straight home games against Tennessee and Oakland. Those are 3 games that you don't want to sit there and say the Browns will win at this point or should win, but they are 3 games that the Browns can win. And if they can go into those first 3 games, finish at least 2-1, maybe 3-0, they can maybe get themselves a little bit of confidence, trick themselves into thinking they're a little bit better than what they are. And sometimes that's the most important thing. It's not being that good, it's believing that you're that good. And if they could get off to a good start in those early matchups in the first 3 weeks, it could really have a positive snowball effect for the rest of that season. And then you look at weeks 12 and 14. They've got a stretch of games where they've got 3 straight at home. They've got Baltimore, they've got Cincinnati, and they've got San Francisco. Now, maybe they can beat San Francisco. And maybe when they're playing at home, they can beat a Cincinnati or they beat a Baltimore. But they must find a way to at least go 2-1 in this stretch. That's 3 straight home games. You got to be able to pounce upon that opportunity. You got to be able to make some hay. And for them to be able to beat a divisional opponent, whether it be Baltimore or Cincinnati, would be a big step forward for that organization going forward. Or at least, if anything else, help salvage the season and make it something that you're not totally ashamed of. But that's the stretch right there as well to watch, even though it's later in the year. They need to get off to a hot start, facing off against teams with quarterbacks like Geno Smith and a young Marcus Mariota and Derek Carr. And then, weeks 12 through 14, that 3 straight games at home. That's an important stretch as well. Overall, though, the schedule, like I referenced earlier, is not that good for the Browns. The uncertainty at the quarterback position is never a good thing. The lack of talent, frankly, in that wide receiving core is also not a good thing. I think this is a team that still has holes on the defensive side of the ball. Now, with that said, with the strength of their offensive line and the strength of talent that they have at running back, stranger things have happened. This is a Browns team that could potentially shock some people again. I just don't see it happening. I think their ceiling is 7 wins this year. I think last year was kind of a flukish thing at the beginning, and towards the end, reality came crashing back down. I think if things go really bad and McCown flames out and then Johnny Manziel stinks, This is a Cleveland Browns team that could potentially be contending for the #1 overall pick in the 2016 NFL draft. I think their floor is probably 3 wins. You know, 7 wins if everything goes well, 3 wins if everything falls apart. So this may be a 5 or 6 win football team. And that's funny because you would think for a team that started off 7-4 last year, we'd be talking about playoffs and singing their praises and this and that. There's a lot of things I look at with the uncertainty, in particular at the quarterback position, the lack of big name talent on the defensive side of the ball, and the number of players that are still on the fence in terms of whether or not they're going to flame out or they're going to pan out, guys like Mingo and Gilbert. And I just got to sit there and say that this doesn't look like it's going to be a good year for the Cleveland Browns in 2015.